Him today, but if we invite him back, he can tell you some very fascinating stories about his experiences in the Middle East. In 1985, he returned to Washington to join the staff of Secretary of State George Shultz, serving as Deputy Executive Secretary of the State Department. In my day in the State Department, the Deputy Executive Secretary had to be in his office at 4 o'clock in the morning. For this, he deserved a medal for the period that he spent there. In this capacity, he oversaw the department's crisis and emergency management apparatus. In August 1987, he was assigned as Deputy Chief of the U.S. Embassy in Manila. Mr. Quinn is the recipient of the William R. Rivkin Award, the Defense Department Decoration for Distinguished Civilian Service, the State Department Superior Honor and Meritorious Honor Awards, and the U.S. National Guard Bureau Eagle Award. He and his wife, Leison, have 3 children, all of whom are here in Manila. We're very fortunate to have a senior American diplomat with such a diverse background and long service at the highest policy-making levels of our government here in Manila. It is a pleasure to introduce Minister Kenneth M. Quinn, Chargé d'Affaires of the United States to the Philippines.
Thank you very much, Nick Thorne. Governor Relly Reyes, Mr. Benny Santos, Dr. Joe Santos, Romy Del Rosario, Conrad Gesslin, Bruce Meyer, Marsh Thompson, and if I may also acknowledge former District Governor Lorenzo Say, who is sitting out here, who has the unique distinction of being a fellow graduate of a small, obscure college in Iowa called Loras College, along with me. And we have just formed the Loras Club of Manila the other night. While we're having lunch, Benny Santos explained to me that it's a tradition for certain people to give their first speech before the Rotary Club of Manila. And you all know who those people are. And I'm not in that league, but this is my first speech in Manila, and I'm delighted there's such a large turnout. And I came in and I said, well, this is fantastic. People really want to hear what I have to say. And then Relly explained to me that Archit Bartolome, the chairman of the attendance committee, had to spread the word that I'd be passing out treasure maps to Yamashita's Gold in order to get this kind of a turnout. So I put them under the soup plates, and I hope you all looked when the soup was there for them. You know, everybody's got the treasure fever, it seems. The other day I called a meeting at the embassy after the ambassador was gone, and I was the chargé, and it was my first staff meeting, and I went in and sit down, there was nobody at the table. And so I went around the embassy looking for them, and I found all the counselors, including Ralph Moore down here in the basement digging. So I don't know if anybody's going to find any gold, but if they do, I hope that it's a Rotarian, because I'd love to see the size of the fine they're going to have to pay. You know, I said that this is my first speaking engagement in Manila, but hearing Conrad Gesslin's invocation reminded me that I had been invited previously to give an invocation at a breakfast, and it was a communion breakfast, and I was on my way, and there was an accident on EDSA, and I couldn't get there, and I'm fortunate I have a phone in my car, and I called up the Master of Ceremonies, and I explained what was going on. I said, I know the food's going to be cold, and so don't wait for me, please go ahead. And so the Master of Ceremonies walked back into the head table, up to the microphone, and explained to the audience that Minister Quinn can't be with us today. Let us give thanks to the Lord. So, I just hope after I speak there's not people with the same sentiments. Seriously, I'm very pleased that my first formal speaking engagement in the Philippines is before a Rotary convention. And my topic for today is the Philippines and the United States making a difference together. And I chose that topic not only because Rotary International is an organization that's clearly concerned with helping people, but also because this is a subject that's too little spoken of here. You know, much is said or written recently about Philippine-U.S. relations, and it seems that not a day goes by without some mention of some aspect of our current historical relationship. And yet somehow these discussions all too often seem to omit one of the most important facets of our more than 80 years together. What we've done together and what impact it has had on the Philippines, the U.S., and the entire world. Everyone's familiar, of course, with our experience together in World War II, but that's not what I want to speak about today. Rather, I want to look at how, together, we've made the difference in the lives of individual people. And it's not really very well known. And so I'd like to tell you 4 short, and I promise you they're short stories, that illustrate what I'm talking about. The first story is set in 1961. Diosdado Macapagal was the new president of the Philippines, and the United States had just elected John F. Kennedy. And while those were the beginning years of the short reign of Camelot in America, throughout Africa, India, South and Southeast Asia, a cholera epidemic of massive proportions was sweeping through scores of countries, including here in the Philippines. Thousands upon thousands of people, many of them children, were dying of dehydration brought on by the diarrhea caused by the cholera. And medical science appeared to be stymied in its quest to combat this deadly killer. Parents' hopes for the futures of their children were dashed against the rocks of an apparently incurable natural catastrophe, and they hopelessly watched as life literally drained from the bodies of their loved ones, as healthy children withered away to skin and bones, and then nothingness. Philippine doctors worked feverishly to deal with this epidemic, and the U.S. Naval Medical Research Unit, known as NAMRU, then based in Taiwan, sent 3 doctors here to work with these Filipino physicians in an attempt to develop a cure. One of those Americans went on to become Surgeon General of the United States, and one of the Filipino doctors later became Minister of Health. But in those days, nearly 30 years ago, all their efforts were concentrated on formulating a solution to this dreaded cholera epidemic. Working in a small, dimly lit office in the Health Ministry compound here in Manila, they were experimenting on an oral solution, something which children could drink to replace their depleted body fluids. Finally, they were set to test it. They went into Pavilion 7 at St. Lazaro Hospital and administered it to a small control group of patients. Hopes were high. This could be the breakthrough they needed, but it was not to be. The patients continued dying. Crestfallen, the team of Filipino and American doctors walked dejectedly out of the ward. But they didn't give up. They persevered. They went back to the drawing board. They revised the solution. They made more tests. They took it back to St. Lazaro and tried again. And this time it worked. The patients lived. The dying stopped. A physician now working for the Philippine Department of Health has said, "This miraculous discovery was like a story out of the Bible." The U.S. and Philippine doctors traveled around the country, showing other physicians and health workers how to use this miracle treatment. And since then, this formula for oral rehydration has made an incalculable difference throughout the world. It's become one of the most important therapies available on this planet, and within a matter of only a few years, reduced the mortality rate from cholera from upwards of 40% to less than 1%. Literally millions of children, the elderly and others who are most susceptible to the ravages of cholera, are alive today because of what those Philippine and American doctors did together in those dimly lit offices near San Lazaro 27 years ago. But the story doesn't end there. Building on this innovative treatment and working together, the government of the Philippines, with U.S. financial support, has established a national rehydration training center, set up treatment clinics around the country, trained over 75 provincial hospital pediatricians in oral rehydration therapy, and supported and funded massive education programs to spread throughout every barangay of this country the knowledge that, at least in this one particular instance, the formula is there to cheat death and let thousands of children continue to live. That new National Center for Oral Rehydration is located right next to San Lazaro Hospital, back where it all began a generation ago. And NAMRU, the U.S. Naval Medical Research Unit, it moved to Manila and continues this work today to find therapies and cures for other tropical diseases that still ravage populations in the Philippines and around the globe, such as malaria, Japanese encephalitis, and dengue fever. And both of these facilities are a constant reminder of and a living testament to those Filipino and American doctors who, by working together, made a difference in the lives of so many people. My second story is about another such partnership, and you'll see it's a lot closer to home for many of you. It's a story about an American woman, I should say, named Julie, who was a Peace Corps volunteer in Luzon. She's one of the nearly 300 Peace Corps volunteers in the Philippines, the largest number of volunteers in any country in the world today. And like other Peace Corps volunteers, she works in a remote barangay to improve, in her case, its public health capability. But she has another job, too. She screens potential candidates for eye surgery performed by Dr. Ed Caparas, who's here with us today, in the well-known, and certainly well-known to all of you, and deservedly praised Rotary Outreach Eye Clinic. And this partnership has been helping people improve and restore their sight since 1983. Well, this story has to do about a man that Julie had found in a remote part of her village who had been blind for 25 years. He got used to being at home, and he was reluctant to leave the secure confines of his house. But Julie pleaded, and she begged, and she cajoled, and finally, with the help of his wife, persuaded him to make the journey to the place where Ed Caparas would perform the surgery to remove his cataracts. And after the operation and the appropriate time passed, the man's bandages were removed. And for the first time in a quarter of a century, he could see. And in a tender and wonderfully human moment, he turned to his wife, he looked at her, and he said, "Dear, your hair's turned gray." That's something my wife says to me every morning, I know. But that man was one of more than 3,000 patients operated on, and 28,000 people helped by Dr. Caparas's program. And it shows what dedicated people like Ed Caparas and his loyal army of Peace Corps volunteers like Julie can accomplish together. Together, they're making it possible for the blind to see. The time for my third story is 1979, and the place, not the Philippines, but Geneva, Switzerland. And the event, an international conference on the plight of Indo-Chinese refugees, the boat people. They had become an unceasing flow then, by land, by sea, men, women, and children who were fleeing Indochina in countless droves, desperately seeking freedom, but finding only uncertainty and deprivation, and in all too many cases, death. The lucky ones found temporary safe haven in makeshift camps in countries not able to support them. The less fortunate perished at sea or died tragically when their frail craft were pushed back into the ocean by people unwilling to give them refuge. Thousands had already died, and countless more would perish. The question was, would the international community respond? or would it turn its back and walk away? At this conference, to answer that question, it looked as though the world would turn its back. Many speeches were given, but little help was pledged. But then, at a critical moment, two men, one Filipino, one American, intervened and changed the course of history. First came a man who was also a Rotarian, Carlos P. Romulo, Foreign Minister of the Philippines. His words to that conference first quieted and then inspired the audience. Listen as I quote a passage from his speech. No event in recent memory has so stirred, as it still does, the conscience of the world as the plight of these refugees, among them the boat people. Believing in a better life elsewhere, they risked life itself by setting out in unseaworthy boats for destinations they hardly knew anything about. The estimates of those who did not make it, which must horrify all of us, number in the hundreds of thousands. Just as in the case of other mass and voluntary movements elsewhere in the world, how long can mankind live with such instances of man's inhumanity to man? At the conclusion of his remarks, General Romulo pledged that the Philippines would open a transit center to process 50,000 refugees for movement onward to the U.S. and other countries. It was a dramatic, magnanimous gesture which brought the audience to its feet for a standing ovation. The first time anyone had so received applause or an ovation in the conference. And the whole tone of the conference began to change, but still more was needed, for the refugees coming through the Philippines had to have a place to go. General Romulo was followed by Vice President Walter Mondale, who further electrified the crowd with the pledge that the U.S. would accept 168,000 refugees a year, a stunning increase over our previous totals. The refugees would have a new home. And he too received a standing ovation. And the combination of these two pledges galvanized other countries into action, and pledges of resettlement from numerous countries were received. And what had appeared to have been a lost opportunity was turned into one of the most important moments in the history of international cooperation. And it eventually resulted in over 1 million refugees being resettled worldwide, and the saving of hundreds of thousands of lives of people who would otherwise drown at sea. It is perhaps the single greatest life-saving effort ever undertaken by the international community. And it all happened because two men, one Filipino and one American, led the way. And that legacy is still with us at Bataan today. People are still being rescued and processed for new lives. And I know that the Rotary volunteer doctors and dentists go out to those camps and are providing needed medical and dental services. Foreign Secretary Manglapes, who attended the 8th anniversary of the Philippine Refugee Center, noted that he was no stranger to being a refugee, and he described his family's escape from the Philippines through Sabah to asylum in the United States. And his presence and your activities on behalf of these refugees are eloquent testimony to the ongoing Philippine concern for this life-saving endeavor. Just as the recent rescue of 126 refugees adrift at sea by a U.S. naval ship confirms America's continued involvement. 9 years after General Romulo and Vice President Mondale took their actions, we're still saving lives together. For my last story, let's go back to 1965. A new idea was being considered in the Philippines, a way of channeling U.S. assistance funds to the provinces to support projects that would directly benefit people most in need. It was called Operation Spread, because the thought behind it was that this would be a pioneering effort, which, if successful, would multiply throughout the country. It was considered a radical departure at the time from accepted aid practices. And if it was successful, it could lead to a dramatic increase in benefits flowing directly to those parts of the country and those people most in need. And if it failed, well, it'd be back to business as usual. Two people were to implement this program. One, a dynamic young Filipino governor, and the other, a young American USAID worker. And they spent evenings working out the details, how the roads would be built, how many children would be educated who had never had the opportunity before. And it was the time of development of the miracle rice, and the two of them would discuss rice-producing techniques and how these advantages could reach into the most distant barangay. And they poured themselves into the effort. And the American would recall stories of the young governor flying around in a helicopter, visiting all parts of the province, continually prodding the Americans and Filipinos to do more, do it faster, and get the services to the people of the province. And whatever the magic was, it worked. These special projects succeeded, and infrastructure and agricultural development were increased and augmented. And this particular province became a pilot project for efforts of AID and the Republic of the Philippines in formulating cooperative programs. And 23 years after this model program, we can see how this effort has been replicated across the countries. Local governments, with USAID support, have built over 7,000 schoolrooms, over 4,000 kilometers of farm-to-market roads. They brought electrification to over 2.5 million households, built large marketplaces in 15 areas, and completed hundreds of other projects, all to help people. Today, nearly 25 years later, the American aid worker remains working in the Philippines, still recalling stories of how he would sit down with that enthusiastic, irrepressible governor and plan projects to better the lives of people. The province they worked in was Tarlac, and that young, dynamic governor who worked so hard to make a difference in the lives of his people was Ninoy Aquino. So, 4 stories. Filipino and American physicians developing a medical formula that saved millions of lives. Dr. Caparas and the Peace Corps volunteer named Julie restoring sight to a blind man. The image of Carlos Romulo and Walter Mondale evoking tremendous applause from international representatives, and a young USAID officer and governor, Ninoy Aquino, huddling by the light of the night and working together for the improvement of the life in the villagers in the Philippines. All these stories share a common denominator. All the people involved, Filipinos and Americans, had a shared concern for the well-being of their fellow man. All were committed to making a difference, although there was no guarantee of success. And in all 4 cases, they succeeded by working together. For alone, their efforts may have been doomed to failure. So, as we continue to discuss Philippine-U.S. relations, we ought to keep in mind this important facet of our overall relationship. Whatever else may be said, the fact is that today, millions of children are alive and thousands of people are better off because of what we've done together. So let me suggest in conclusion that if we're ever in doubt about the way to go, or in doubt about the strength of the friendship and the bonds that unite our two peoples, we do well to remember these stories of people who made a difference, Filipinos and Americans who showed us the way, and who, most importantly, created a legacy which will endure for many years to come. Thank you very much.
Mr. Quinn, we can't thank you enough for that stirring message. If it's your first speech, I think it's one of the few times we've had a standing ovation and such a warm response to what you had to tell us. It was really 4 anecdotes, and I think they're undoubtedly going to prove to be a marvelous guide to the behavior of us all. Now, ladies and gentlemen, fellow Rotarians, we are going to have the chance to ask the minister some questions. The program indicates an open forum, and we'd like to get on with that at this time. Minister Quinn will come back to the podium, and I don't think he's going to limit the questions, so let's have at it. Am I able to recognize the first question from the floor? Do you want to do it that way? Because of the glare of the lights, I can't really see too well who's standing to be recognized. Would you please just proceed there in the middle of the floor?
No mic.
That long mic. Yeah, we just can't use this one.
Moy Canayon of the Rotary Club of Manila Central.
The winner of the trip to Hong Kong last night. Your speech, Mr. Minister, is very nice. But I'm just wondering, the previous newspaper